the onions, peel the onions. Welcome to Peel the Onions with Sashlin. I'm Sashlin, and on this channel we look at data analytics, data science stuff. In our last lesson we looked at what data analytics was and what skills you may need, so check that one out somewhere over here or something. And we mentioned how Excel is one of the things that we need to learn. So in this lesson we're going to get into how to excel at Excel. And so I've prepared this little Excel document and extended it from the last time. So previously we had our raw data, and I briefly showed these things called pivot tables. And in this lesson we're going to actually get into what Excel is and how you go about actually working with Excel. So before we get into it, just to explain what type of data you normally work with when you're dealing with Excel. So you will notice that if you look at our data, this is normally referred to as tabular data, and that's the type of data you usually work with Excel. So Excel is a spreadsheet tool to analyze this data. And in summary, Excel, you can use built-in formula and mathematical operations to manipulate data into a format that you may require. Okay, so let's get into this little tutorial on Excel. And so this is not an extensive deep dive into Excel, but it's going to give you a nice overview on how to work with Excel. So let's get into it. So here we have our little presentation in Excel, and it's how to excel at Excel. And so the things we're going to go through, so we're going to just get an introductory type of thing of what Excel is and what cells are, what formulas are, what functions are. That's the type of things we're going to get into, and some of the how to reference things in Excel. So we'll get into that in a minute, and how do we summarize data, because that's essentially where we want to get to. How do we take this raw data and produce these nice graphs so we can actually visualize it in a more meaningful way. And there's some end off it with some shortcuts and tips. So I'm probably going to split these sections into multiple different videos because it might get a bit meaty. So let's get into it, guys. Let's get into it. So we're going to get into the underlying fundamentals of Excel, and these are formulas and functions. So pretty much everything stems from formulas and functions in Excel. And then when you do fancier things, it's basically using all of these formulas and functions under the hood. So what is a formula? So a formula is anything that is prefixed with an equals. So you can see this particular cell has a formula of equals 1 plus 2. And if I were just to write 1 plus 2 like that, it's going to see it as text as opposed to an actual formula and do the actual calculation. Whereas if I just add an equals in front of it, it's going to take that as a formula. So a very simple thing, and this is kind of this is the fundamentals of Excel is having these formulas. Cell referencing. So this is once again I mentioned you have So this is an important one in Excel, is referring to a specific cell. So there's the columns and then there's the rows, which need to work together to actually refer to a particular cell. For example, so we have columns across the top. So we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way not to Z, goes on beyond Z, goes A, B, A, C, and so on. And then you have your rows across the bottom, which it goes to up to 1 million. So to refer to a particular cell, for example, let's say I want to refer to the cell A15, I can just say equals A15, and you can see that I'm referring to that A15 cell, which has the value of 1. And you can actually do any type of cell referencing where you include all of them. So let's say I wanted to add all of these together, so I can just say A. So a nice thing about Excel is you don't have to type out a particular cell. You can just use your arrows and actually go to the cell references itself. So you can actually go to each individual cell with your arrows, and it will fill in the formula the actual cell reference. So you can see here, instead of typing A15, A16, A17, I just use my arrows to go there. And then if we were to just get the answer of it, you would just press enter. So A key thing to know is that every formula returns some sort of result. So, and to get that sort of result, you usually press enter. After you fill in this formula, you can actually delay the calculation of the formula, but I won't go over that in this little series. And then also you have different sheets in Excel, and these are across the bottom. You can do multiple different things for these sheets, and you can go crazy and have many sheets. You can even color your sheets at the bottom to get some nice organization going on. And it's all about, when you're dealing with Excel, it's trying to get a workflow that is as logical as possible and easy to share your work with others. So it's usually a good idea to work from left to right. So for example, what I mean by that is that the right hand sheet will be dependent on the left hand sheet, and so on and so on. Okay, so probably the coolest thing about Excel is that you can copy paste your formulas from one cell to the other, and it knows the relative referencing when you actually copy these formulas. So let me show you an example to know what I mean when I say it knows the relative referencing. So let's just say I wanted to sum all of these guys up here. So I go B23 plus C23 plus D23. So I have this formula where I'm just summing all of these different columns on the same row. Now, the cool thing about Excel, as I said, you can copy this formula with Control C, or you can right click and press copy. So Control C on a Windows machine, Command C on a Mac if you are doing that, and then you can just paste it with your Control V or Command V. And you can see here that what it's gone ahead and done, it's, if you press F2, you're able to see what the actual formula in a particular cell, and then it will highlight the cells that is actually being used in the formula, which is also an important thing to know. And you can see that it's actually just, because we've copy pasted one row below, it's actually gone ahead and replaced each part of the formula, and it's gone and added one to the row because it knows that we've gone down one. And if you do the same for the last guy here, it's also going to work with that. Another cool thing to do is you can also drag the formulas down. You can see a little cross appear at the bottom of the cell, and if you just drag them down, it's going to copy and paste those formulas. So really cool things, guys, really cool things. And that's what makes it so quick to work with Excel, because you can just fill in a formula in one cell, drag it down, and basically it's going to make your life super simple. And Rob's your name, Mum's your name. I forgot that saying. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, moving on to relative and absolute references. So I've briefly mentioned what relative references are, and these are, I'm going to explain what they are. So relative references are when you actually refer to the reference of the cell, and when you copy and paste to another cell, it's going to move one down as well. Just as we just saw when we copy paste the formulas, when we copy pasted from the one row above to the one below, everything in the formula moved one down. But what if you don't want that to happen? What would you do? Would you just die and just give up, and then, you'd be depressed for the rest of your life? No, there's another thing to do to handle these relative references, and these are called absolute references. So let's get into what I mean by that. So here's a nice example of relative references. So we have this formulas where we're summing all of these things up, and let's just say we were to copy and paste it one down. It's going to head and going to copy, it's going to sum up the cell, that empty cell at the bottom, which is not what we want, because we might want to still keep it at that sum there. So you would think we need some sort of absolute referencing. And by that meaning, when we refer to a particular cell and copy paste to another cell, things must stay the same so that we're not depressed. Okay? Okay. Here's an example of this absolute referencing. So we have, let's just say, if you want to multiply all of these numbers by this particular cell. So remember, if we were to just say equals this guy times by this guy, and then we copied that down. Oh no, we have zeros. That's not what we want, because what is happening here is actually timesing by an empty cell, so it's giving a 0. But no, we want to keep this particular, we want to, all the cells, we want to make sure we multiply by the same particular cell. So what we're going to do is this thing called absolute referencing, and a shortcut to do that is F4. So F4 changes it to absolute referencing, and all that does is puts a $sign in front of the A, and which is to say keep the column absolute as well as the row. So now let's see what that happens. And so the first time you press this F4, it's going to have the both column and row as absolute. But if you press F4 again, you can cycle through all the different absolute referencing. So you can see that I have only the absolute reference for the row. If I do it one more time, it's going to go back. So you can see it's going to cycle through. Boop, boop, boop. It's going to go column. Yep. And then, so we want absolute referencing for everything. So now if we drag the things down, you can see everything is multiplying by the cell that we wanted to. Super easy, super easy. We're going to answer this question, how do you enter a formula? I pretty much answer this. All you do is say equals 1 plus 2, and that's a formula. So anything in terms of a formula, press equals and your A for away, you know what I'm saying? Okay, so what are these functions? And all these functions are just built-in formulas that will help you speed up your Excel modeling, if you want to call it that, or your Excel analysis. So there's a sum function, there's an average function, there's an if function, all these different types of functions, and all you need to do is you start typing, and it will, if you know the name or the start of the name of the function, it will pop up these little pop-ups. And so if there's most recently used, it'll pop up those, but there's also a bunch of other functions here that are available. So I want to show you guys the sum function for simplicity, but there's tons of other functions that are available in Excel, and it depends on what you're trying to do in your analysis. But let's just say I wanted to sum, and I wanted to sum all of these guys. So I wanted to sum this guy, then you say comma, and then you say this guy here, and then this guy here. So that's going to give us the sum. It's going to be 7. Another way to do these sums, which is quite useful, is use a range. So if you just click on the first number of the range, and if you to hold down shift, now it's going to select this entire range, but no, now it doesn't put a comma between each of the numbers. It just says from B54, which is this particular cell, all the way to D54, and we're going to sum all of those up. So that's a nice thing also about Excel. You can have these ranges, so you don't have to specify every single value when you're doing anything with your functions. And so how functions work is, as you can see, when you type in the function, there's these things called function arguments. So these are the things that this function needs in order to do some sort of calculation. So you can see that it has a number 1, so that's the first argument. Then the number 2 is surrounded by the square bracket, and normally the square bracket says these arguments are optional. So all these functions and function arguments is just a way of reusing some sort of built-in functionality or built-in calculation. So it makes your life a whole lot easier. Instead of you typing out 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, you can just use a sum function or maybe an average function, which will do this instead, but it'll do this for different sort of numbers. So that's what makes these functions really useful, is because you can reuse this sort of sum function and average function all over your Excel workbook, and making your life a whole lot simpler. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty much your formulas and functions in Excel. And as I mentioned before, this is pretty much the underlying foundations for what you need to know in Excel. And once you know these sorts of concepts, you can build on it nicely in order to do a lot more fancier things. And actually, this is, even though it doesn't appear this way, this is actually some sort of introduction to programming concepts. It's having these things called functions and reusable code. So this is actually a concept in programming that's used a lot. So well done. You guys are knowing how to program already without me even saying anything. So kudos to you. Give yourself a pat on the back or gold stars, whatever you want to. Anyway, in the next lesson, we're going to check out easy referencing and how this can also make your life so much easier when you're working in Excel, and especially when you're dealing with a larger Excel workbook. So let's check that one out.